continuous change, because change is an opportunity for us to grow. We can see challenges as an opportunity for growth and to come out stronger, or let this drive our narrative. The choice is really ours. In short, an entrepreneur with a growth mindset is able to learn from mistakes and use them to grow their business. Whereas those with a fixed mindset might dwell on failures and setbacks and maybe have a reason to give up. And if you don't believe in yourself at the end of the day, how can anybody else? So, in this short webinar, we'll share with you how to design and grow mindset to boost your business in times of uncertainty. What does the brain science have to do with all this? How does neuroscience and the way our brain operates affect our sort of day-to-day thinking and decision making? You're going to walk away with some practical understanding of the growth mindset. How do you identify perhaps blockers that stop you from achieving certain things? And finally, we're going to put it into practice. So we're going to give you like a step by step of how do you actually practice it and what do you do with it, right? But before we do that, let us introduce ourselves real quick.
And this is the moment where it works. Perfect.
So just quickly about myself, guys. I'm Elena. In fact, I come from a background of higher education and learning. I've been doing this for over 12 years between the US and the Middle East. And in recent years that I've been in Dubai for the last 7 years, I've shifted more towards corporate learning. So really working with corporations and individuals and helping their mid-level managers to grow in their careers, essentially. So really looking at the leadership development, soft skills development, and furthermore, how can we actually help people grow in a way that is individualized and personalized and in a way that works for them. I'm super passionate about learning, future of work. I do a lot of career development talks and on topics such as these. Between and I, Ivan, we publish in various publications and we're quite present in the media as well. So this is something that was super like a personal story for us to say how can we really create learning for individuals that really makes a change, that makes a change, not just a traditional sort of let's talk about things, but how do we talk about things, how do we get people to actually implement some of the things that we research and discuss. And that's a bit about me. And about a couple of years back, Ivan and I, after 6 years of friendship, we've decided to jump on the startup train and co-founded a couple of startups together, which Ivan will tell you a little bit more about.
Elena, first of all, I am super excited because to do something with Astrolabs, they have been part of our journey. So 2 years ago when we started, we had the support, the help of Astrolabs in order to move forward in our journey. And to realize that it makes 2 years and to talk a little bit about have a little bit of what is our story, how did we create this company, and how the growth mindset had to deal a lot with what we do in the steps where we are. Imagine that 2 years ago, we were just like kind of crawling, trying to understand the market, trying to understand what could be the point of differentiation. I still remember these long conversations that we were having. We knew that we wanted to be in a specific area of development because that was part of our passion. But we had to play around and validate our assumptions about how do we differentiate versus the current offer when we know that there is the 5 major players are making 90% of the revenues in terms of education inside of the Middle East. How can we, small piece of startup, start running against them? And then, so after the crawling part, we had the walking part, and now I guess that we are ready to run, to scale up. A little bit about myself. I have a background of corporate. In fact, I was an engineer who turned into marketing and technology. For 17 years, I've been working in corporate. And one of the biggest challenge, in fact, it is to adapt to the way entrepreneurs should be thinking. And this is something that makes me quite excited because the change between the Ivan living in the corporate world more than 3 years ago and today is quite drastic. And part of the story that we're going to tell you is how the brain processes this information and also a little bit of how we did it in our own experience. This is great.
right. So before we get into today's discussion, I just want to ask you guys a quick question. So you can scan this. Let's do a quick Slido. Scan the barcode right there on the screen, and join us to answer this question. And just give us a word, or how would you describe growth mindset? Like, what does it mean to you? There's a lot of talk about it, right? So I just want to kind of get us to start putting our minds around, thinking about this topic. So drop us a quick little answer in Slido. I know a couple of you are joining from your phone, so hopefully you are able to do that, but let's give it a few seconds for everybody to sort of submit their answers. There you go. And those who just joined us now, welcome, welcome. Please use the chat box to chat with us. And it's good to be with you. Great. We have a couple of people so submitted. So we have forward thinking, to be open to new ideas from everyone around us. Absolutely. What about the rest of you guys? The belief that you can improve and progress, the ability to learn from your mistakes. Yes, love it. Others? We have over 20 people on the call. So adapt to change, positive thinking. I think everybody's growth mindset was tested last year to be able to be a forward thinker. If you're coming into 2021 with these thoughts, I love it. You've made it. You made it. The hard part is over, hopefully, right? All right, great.
Elena, something that is quite striking is that when we look at these words and we are not familiar with the on how the brain processes changing behaviors or starting changing the way we perceive the world, we don't know that, in fact, in order to make it, is not a big effort. Is rather than having a lot of intensity doing the drastic change, it is about doing small compounded actions. And this is something that we are going to heavily discuss today. It's about how do we create these areas, so these routines, so that we live the world in the present moment and we progress and we groom this growth mindset of an entrepreneur. Anyone else wants to go and join Slido? Oh, there was somebody else.
I think we have a few people who are joining from from their phones, so it might be a bit challenging, which is all right. Great, thank you guys for saying great answers. Absolutely, right on point. If only if it was so easy to implement all the time, right? All right, so just to give you guys just a bit of a context, I want to talk a little bit about kind of, how growth mindset came around. And I think it's important to have a little bit of background. So over 30 years ago, a researcher and professor, her name was Carol Dweck, and maybe many of you are familiar with this. There's a great book. It's called The Mindset. So if you want to learn more about it, definitely check it out. It's a quick book. So basically, her and her colleagues became like super interested about how do people's how are people's attitudes about failure. And they noticed that some people actually rebounded while others seemed devastated even by like smallest setbacks. And after studying the behavior of thousands of people, this is where Dr. Dweck coined the terms fixed mindset and growth mindset to really describe the underlying belief people have about their own learning and intelligence. And when it comes to change, right, we might not always be able to control the outcome, but we can control our response to it. So even just an example of, think about your last entrepreneurship setback, right? We all have those. What are some of the reactions that you felt? What were the initial sort of reactions that you wanted to feel about the setback, and kind of what led you to take this and to create an opportunity out of this challenge? Or what led you to think positively and look at it as an opportunity to grow, right? So the reaction is very different for everybody. And that's really growth mindset as resilience. It gives you the tools to to bounce back from even the tough situations. And essentially, growth mindset, as many of you have mentioned, is the ability to improve. But more than that, it's our belief that we can improve. So as you can see on the slide, if we have the belief, which is the starting point of it all, right? Because there's a lot of really smart and intelligent people who simply don't believe in themselves, right? So the belief is the real beginning stage of this. So it's when people really believe that they can get better, they understand that effort will make them stronger. And if they believe that they can get better, they then put on the extra time and that effort that leads to higher achievements, right? But it all starts with that belief. And also, just to add a little bit of science, and recent advances in neuroscience has shown us that our brain is actually far more malleable, meaning we can essentially tailor it towards our future, right, than we ever knew. And I was watching something the other day, and it was on video, and it literally showed how our brain components on this scan, I mean, how they're actually starting to create new connections. So you could actually see that after a certain number of days and weeks of certain different way of thinking, like if you go from being a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, right, your brain literally starts to change, like the actual structure of your brain begins to change. So it's quite interesting. But Ivan is the science guy here, so he'll talk more to us about that. So it's really our brain plasticity has shown that connectivity between neurons can actually change our experiences, right? And with practice of thinking and doing a certain thing, like growth mindset in this case, networks in our brain actually grow connections, strengthen existing ones, and essentially that is how what's the word, neuroplasticity works, right? And again, here we have a choice. We can either create our brain in a way that is going to drive us further, right? So growth mindset, or it's going to add something negative. So the choice is actually ours. And anyway, so that's a bit about here. Ivan, you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I was thinking about one point that you did about the neuroplasticity. So our brain, in fact, 95% of our brain, it is kind of the subconscious. So where we have routines, principles, things that our parents have told us when we were 2 years old or so, it is a storage of a lot of rules that are anchored in the long-term memory of our brain. And this is what defines, in fact, the person that we are. All of these rules and beliefs that we have, for instance, oh, you are not capable to be an entrepreneur, or you are not capable to succeed to talk with customers, or you are not capable of being strategic enough to develop your corporation. All these beliefs that somebody has told us remain anchored in this long-term memory. Now, the trick is that it is possible to change that, and this is the principle of neuroplasticity. It is to put back new information in this subconscious, this 95% of the brain, and create a routine that will make it be stored inside of this long-term memory. And this is what we are going to be practicing. But before we go forward, I want to get back to the world of entrepreneurship, because this is something, the journey that we have got is quite amazing. So we are a tech company in education. And I wanted to just to remind each other about what are the principles of when you are an entrepreneur or when you want to be an entrepreneur. So being an entrepreneur basically follows a little bit of certain processes, which is continuous search of a business model that is repetitive, scalable, but more importantly is that we find out if it works without burning all of the resources, all of the money that we have, and we need to do it fast and cheap. So this is the famous, in fact, iteration between building an idea or an assumption, measuring the results, and learning out of this in order to validate our assumptions, keeping the principles of the use of the processes to go fast and cheap. These principles are quite well known. There is books from Eric Ries, Steve Blank about the principles of lean startup. And what I wanted to draw is the parallel that it can have in our personal life, because here is the minute of change, of reflection, of thinking. Can we use these same principles that we use in order to scale up, survive, to build a startup in our personal life? And this is what I would like to discuss. So certain part of the processes that are iterations of continuous validation are divided in three parts. The first one is about defining the problem itself. How do you realize that somebody needs your product? How do you validate that there is really a problem, there is really a problem to be solved, and it's not something like an illusion that you have that there is a problem? This is the first phase. The second phase, which is post the area of design thinking, is about defining how do we create ideas, but in order to create ideas that are going to be wanted by someone and that people are going to pay for it, you need to have, again, certain iterations that happens in order to validate how would it work? What is out of the problem that you have defined, is that a potential solution? And this happens, in fact, way before you develop the product, because the next step is the use of the Agile methodology in order to start building a product. Again, the principle is cheap and fast, with a small releases, sprints of releases of features that are going to be validated by the users in order to minimize the risk of running out of money. So these are the principles, and the main idea about all of this principle is to answer the question: does anybody care about my idea? Would anyone pay for this? And the third part is: am I capable to make it happen? Fast and cheap equals to iteration of mini validation of your assumptions on your market. So there are a lot of crazy ideas or legends about people who have been successfully implemented this approach. Like if we think about the company called Zappos. Zappos was an online seller of shoes. So before they launched the company, before their acquisition by Amazon, in fact, the guys wanted to validate if anybody would buy shoes online. That was approximately 12 years ago. Obviously, back then, that wasn't the most used means or way to buy shoes online. And in order to validate their idea, they created a landing page with pictures, by the way, that came from a small shoe retailer downstairs from their apartment. And they were validating if somebody was going to choose one of the shoes and buy it online. So the cost of doing this experiment was approximately $200. Instead of building a full e-commerce to validate the stock, logistics, and so on, they could validate if there was traction. So what they wanted to do is to reduce the risk of being an entrepreneur by validating quickly if there is somebody who wants the product, if somebody would pay for it, and if they're capable of running it. There is other stories. I don't know if you have heard about Dropbox. The first, before they used approximately $100 million to implement a mega solution that a lot of people use in this part of the world. The first thing that they did is to create just a movie, a page with a movie and with a button saying buy it now. So they were explaining all of the features with the landing page, and they were checking how many people would buy the product for as a subscription model. And only with this information, they could go and raise money. So what we are saying, that the way of thinking, this story about fast and cheap, is not easy when you come from a corporate background like me, because in a corporate background, there is stability, there is processes in places, the risk is minimal. No matter what happens to the company, unless it goes completely bankrupt, I will still receive my salary. As an entrepreneur, you really need to go fast to validate and to do small experimentations. So I have a couple of keywords that I would like to highlight out of this conversation. So we are talking about the first phase when you have an idea you want to understand really the problem. So the key word that you need to keep is empathize. The second keyword is about problem framing, understanding what is really the problem. The third word that belongs to the world of the design thinking lean startup is experimentation. How can we quickly run experiments in our startup in order to validate our assumptions? Third word that is quite valid is about developing a minimum viable product, a product that is not nice. It might be hard to sell, but it solves partially the problem of your users. There is also the concept of sprints, of running continuous iterations between I have an assumption, I validate, I do a learning, and if it doesn't work in terms of my the product that I want to deliver, I drop it, I pivot, simply. And then the last part is about validation with data. So all of these keywords that I have mentioned, empathizing, problem framing, experimentation, sprints, validation with data. What if, Elena, if we were capable of using it in our own life? That's the thinking behind. And this is something that it looked crazy back then, 2 years ago, when we were building the model of Bessel. We were thinking, so we want to have a differentiation. We know what is our passion. Our passion is in self-development, helping people to grow and so on. But we cannot fight against 5 big guys in corporate learning who are owning 90% of the market. So what if we understand a process in order to make change of behavior stick? And some of the principles, in fact, that we use in our methodology of learning is based on this design thinking, lean startup, and agile, helping people to continuously run experiments, continuously have validations of their assumptions. And in fact, this is highly correlated to what we call the growth mindset. And that's the big question. And I want to ask to you, would this work for your personal growth? If there was something that you have heard from this principle, these keywords, is it something that we can extrapolate from the world of startups and do it for our personal development? So go to slido.com, use the hashtag Astro, and please, I'm looking forward to have your answers, because we are going now to make the link between this story with the startups and our personal growth.
You know what I find so interesting is that, as you said, like there's so many methodologies and like from lean startup, agile to growth hacking that we use in startup world, and so many of these are applicable in our personal. So whether you're looking to create new habits, whether you're looking to, I don't know, get in shape, whether you're looking to write a book, whether you're looking to, maybe some of you who are not in the startup world, maybe you're doing careers, so you can like growth hack your job search. You can create an agile methodology to help you like test different markets, for example. So it's it's so interesting, because I think we get so into like startup and mode that we forget that some of the lessons that we learn as entrepreneurs can be applied in our personal lives. And I think for those of you on the call, for many of you guys that are going through this entrepreneurship journey, you understand how that part of design thinking and lean startup works. You're probably already doing it with your startup, so it should be quite easy to translate into your personal growth. And as many of you have said, yes, we have somebody who said not sure. Hopefully, you'll be convinced by the end of this presentation. But anyway, yeah. So it's yeah, I think it's really been a game changer for us on a personal level, about, like you said, Ivan, about just behavior change. Like, how can we use this knowledge? It's the same, guys. Like it's applicable across board. So we're going to show you how to kind of frame your thinking around that next.
So some of the words that we have used are valid for how do you build continuous routines that are going to help you build this growth mindset. Growth mindset, it cannot just be like something that belongs to a book. And by the way, I just wanted to get back to that point. One of the things that I did incorporate, Elena, it was to basically get inspired out of books on leaders, get inspired reading a lot. Like, I guess that there was a time where I was reading 1 or 2 books per month that were related to self-development. And what didn't work for me is that you cannot just take the learnings from somebody who was famous and extrapolate it to your own life. You need to have the option to design yourself the process of learning and choosing the actions that are most relevant to your conditions. And that's why the story about just reading books on stories from others doesn't work. You need to make it yourself, understand better, to have a certain level of self-awareness on yourself, so that you can produce change. Now, I wanted to dissect, in fact, the keywords that I mentioned before that are related to how do you bring innovation to the society, or how do you build a startup, and bring it back to us. So the keywords are empathetic. To create new and better ways of doing things, we need to first understand who we are creating them for. So understand ourselves. Why are certain things more important to us? How do we react and feel with these things? So the level of empathy that we need to have with ourselves needs to be high in order to commit to the changes that are related to the world of innovation. As an entrepreneur, you need to develop this type of habits, this type of actions that are recurrent in a day-to-day basis. The other thing is that you need to be a problem finder. So how to ask good questions instead of simply asking for answers. All innovations in our life start from a question and not an answer, in fact. The invention of home computer, for instance, started with a focus on how do we bring the experience of powerful computer into the homes of family. So it wasn't about jumping directly to solutions. So as an entrepreneur, this is a skill that we need to develop, not to focus so much in the solutions, because we have a lot of biases. We live in a certain area that makes us believe that what we say, it is true. But the focus that needs to be created in entrepreneur is rather about understanding this problem, framing the problem a little bit like in this lean startup, to understand deeply, be in the shoes of someone. And when it's about our self-development, being thoughtful of everything that relates to us. What are our values? What exactly bother us the most? The third aspect is about being risk taker. And this is a tough one because, to be sincere, that has always been one of my personal struggles. You have been for 17 years in corporate, you avoid risk. Basically, you receive a salary, the less risky actions you take, the better it is, because you are fired sometimes in different organizations. You might be fired if you do a mistake. Nowadays, there is still not enough corporations that allow people to do mistake and get the learnings, even though it's recognized as one of the main drivers for self-motivation. So risk-taking, many would argue that best practice is the enemy of innovation. To be truly innovative, you sometimes have to go off of this beaten path and try to dare. The next point is about being networked. And this is quite important, because what we need to have is to create these connections that are not related. Network, it doesn't mean hanging with the same crowd who have the same mindset or the same opinions about things. It's about, in order to create innovation, as an entrepreneur, you need to be connected with people that are not related, artists, people who are just doing something different. If you are an engineer, talk with lawyers, talk with people in a bar, in a coffee place. In this type of interactions produces that the brain is continuously doing these small lights that you mentioned, Elena, just before, these new pathways in the brain that makes that the more connections you have in your brain, the more you become creative. So, and understanding that when you connect with different people, the type of conversations that you're going to have are going to be stored in your subconscious, and your subconscious is going to create connections that you wouldn't have thought if you were simply hanging with engineers and you are yourself an engineer.
Mm. And
The next
on
step,
this point,
yeah.
on this point, real quick, Ivan, the biggest question we usually get, and maybe many of you are thinking, is wonderful. I need to get myself. I need to put myself out there. I need to network with different people. How do I do that, right? Especially if for many of you, if you're still being mindful of course, the whole situation with the pandemic. So, one platform that we found quite useful is Lunch Club, and maybe many of you already heard of it. But that's been a brilliant place to really meet fellow entrepreneurs. People are just very different. It's free to use. So lunchclub.ia, whatever it is. So Lunch Club has been brilliant for us. So check that out. Of course, the events that Astrolabs puts together, like when you are, if you really want to implement this sort of different, networking with different people, look for events you normally wouldn't go for. So that's the key, right? Like find events that normally be like, oh, I'm not sure, like, do I really want to do this? These are the events that might actually teach you something completely different and get you out of your comfort zone. So go for events you normally wouldn't go for. That is how you expand your network beyond your immediate comfort zone people that you normally go to. All right.
That's right. And this is something that it took me also a little bit of time to get there, right, Elena? If you think about how, well, me being someone who is a little bit more reserved, to connect with people was a little bit of a challenge. But as we mentioned before, everything is done in a small little pieces, small habits that you create until you get used to these new connections of, if you are, well, I wouldn't qualify myself as shy, but I would qualify myself as more reserved. It was a challenge that I had to work through small little habits. Now, I want to get back to this story, connecting, in fact, the learnings from from the startup world to behaviors that we need to have as an entrepreneur. Being observant, the capacity to look around the world outside, specifically outside of our comfort zone. If you are a tech guy, go and look into marketing, understand, observe people, the observation of things in nature, observation of people reaction, and specifically being capable of taking these notes, to have always a notebook with you in order to take notes on what you are observing, because what you want to do is to observe connections that nobody else have seen. Next step, creator. And when I say creator, it's not about having ideas, because everybody knows that ideas in the entrepreneurship do not matter. What matters is that your capacity to execute these ideas. So creating, it means not having the ideas, it means being capable of actionably rolling them out, making them happen, because the success of in the startup world comes from the implementation and doesn't come just from the idea. That's a long discussion to have, but I will stop here. The next step is about resilience. So, and this is something quite usual in the entrepreneurship world. In average, person receives 10 no's in a day. When we are in the long run of having discussions, either for new partnerships or either with new customers, we spend our time pitching, selling, reinventing what we do. That's a high number, but this is the realities of being an entrepreneur. How do we build this capacity to resource ourselves, recreate the energy to go again, to move forward. Next step is to be reflective, to be able to say what worked and what didn't. What could we do the next time? Is this iteration, if you remember, the build, measure, and learn is about the possibility to take a learning of things. And what is super important, and I don't want to call it journaling, Elena, because journaling has been a little bit bastardized by the world of life coaches and so on. But I want you to highlight that the fact of taking notes of your learnings is something that is super important in order to create and develop what you are going to be doing next. Don't call it journaling, call it just being reflective.
You know, I love
Now,
the point that you said about the resilience piece, and I think that's something we can all relate to on this call. I think no matter what you're doing at any point of your entrepreneurship journey, you're just becoming immune to no's. You're like, all right, next. Like it's just part of the journey, but and it completely builds resilience because you just, the first one hurts. The first 20 no's maybe hurt. I don't know about you, Yvonne. The first 20, you're like, but why? Like this is an amazing product, right? As every entrepreneur. Like, what do you mean no? Like, how do you not buy my amazing idea, this product? So yeah, so I think that it's such a great point, and I think that's such a resilience builder. So if there was a way to build resilience, go hear a bunch of no's. That definitely builds resilience.
Elena, and what is funny is that I gave the example about customer acquisition, but basically imagine the times where we were fighting with our own app and bugs were coming back and forth, and we were depressed because it wasn't working the way we expected it. So the resilience part about believing that we will find a solution no matter how bad you feel at that specific moment when you are testing your app and it doesn't work in the way expected. Now, what I wanted to highlight is that these 8 areas of that belongs to the growth mindset of an entrepreneur, and that heavily related to this living the life as an experiment, trying new things, because what is written in books is not going to work definitely for you, and you need to experiment what works for you and have continuous iterations, and all of these cannot happen just in one day. What we're saying is that the brain has a natural resistance to change, especially if you have been formatted like me for 17 years of corporate world. You cannot just change from one day to the other, but what you can do is to benefit from certain certain areas on how the brain works in order to move forward. Now, I mentioned to you that the brain doesn't accept change easily. It's a little bit like when we decide to go and lose weight and go to the gym and then we drop it, our motivation is not enough. Motivation is one of these small factors that contributes to change. But as I say, it's small. What contributes the most to change, and this is based on the research by Dr. Beji Fox, is the ability to do mini efforts so that your brain doesn't produce the enzymes that indicate signals, fear, and you get blocked and it affects your motivation. So what you need to remember is that in order to drive change, do a small consistent steps. Consistency is key because what you're doing is cheating the brain to create an additional routine that is going to be stored in the long-term memory. And it will be like a principle. You would do it without even thinking. The other thing is that is quite important about how the brain works is that the brain doesn't distinguish between reality and fiction. So driving emotions, being able to realize the present moment and being happy about these small little steps that you are doing is something that contributes the adoption by the brain of new behaviors. If you don't have some of these behaviors, every single one of them, it is possible to translate it into a micro habit that the first one may or may not work for you, but you try it and you do your loop of building the assumption, measuring and learning. And if it doesn't work, you pivot, you change to another habit, but the aim, the goal remains the same. And this is it. We have moved from the world of startups, connected with how we can self-improve and use some of the principles, some of the processes into areas of development. Now, the areas of development will not happen alone. And what we are going to tell you now is more about how do you convert these areas of development into routines, actions. And by routines, we say something that is consistently done, like even once per day, but it doesn't have to take you like long time, like 1 hour or something like that. It can start with 2 minutes or even 1 minute. So let me start with the process, Elena, and then you help me with the next one, right?
Yep, go for it.
Okay, so the first step of the process is about clarifying your goals of aspirations. So a goal of aspiration, in order to be understood by the brain, it cannot be just a sentence. It's not a SMART goal. By the way, we are a little bit into we are not big believers of the SMART goals. A lot of people have been using them as a way of development, but unfortunately, it doesn't get anchored in our brain, and most of them fail to reach their goals because it simply doesn't work. What I'm trying to say is that goals, it needs to be an image of the person you want to become. It's almost like
Oh, you're back, Ivan. You're muted though. No, you're still muted, Ivan. That's right.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, now you're good. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so let me get back about this story with clarifying your goals. Clarifying your goal, it means to create an image of the person you want to be. For instance, I want to be the person that has helped around 100,000 people in terms of self-development by the end of 2021. But I don't just have to say it. It's not just a sentence. The brain, in order to process it, needs to create this image of, okay, Ivan, what are you doing in that moment? You have the numbers in front of you. What is it happening? How do you feel? Feelings is a way to store what matters to you in the long-term memory of your brain. So clarifying your goals is a sentence. I want to be the kind of person that has got an impact in 100,000 lives in the world. And I want to have this image of how I feel in my brain, anchor it with an emotion.
And after you do that, number 2 here is looking at exploring your behavior options. So what that really means is just looking at how can you crowdsource essentially ideas for behavior. So for example, maybe it's, let's just take an example of you want to be healthier, get in shape. Is your options going to yoga in the morning? Are your options walking the dog? Maybe it's exercising before you go to bed. Maybe you want to work on your stress management, and maybe for that, maybe playing music is an option for you, maybe gardening. Looking at options that are feasible for you. And as Ivan mentioned, like there's a lot of books out there that talk to you about how to do certain things, but they're not customized to you. So, and there's many ways to manage stress. There's many ways to develop growth mindset, but you need to figure out what are the different options available to you that work for you. Right. And then and it's great to have all that knowledge and all of that information, but then you need to make an educated choice that works for you. So when you're crowdsourcing these potential behaviors, look at those that make sense to you.
Just to recap, so we are talking about there is a goal and behaviors are actions. So if I want to be a little bit more and a little bit less anxious when I'm speaking in public, I have different choices of actions that could help me to reach that specific aspiration that I have. So behaviors are actions that you can do that are not big stuff. It's not like a behavior will be start doing an MBA. That's not a behavior. It's almost like a tactic or a strategy in order to reach your goal. So how can you start having a crowdsourcing of actions that you can do that are not that tedious? Now, the next step, the step number 3, is more or less that you have, let's say, 5 to 10 different actions that you can start implementing. But some of them will not match your current lifestyle. What does it mean? For instance, in order to manage my stress or my anxiety, doing yoga could have been one of the behaviors that I can do. But unfortunately, I did the experiment and it didn't work for me. It wasn't matching my current lifestyle where I have kids and they're continuously running around the house. I couldn't find a moment of serenity where I can do use one of the yoga mats. So I need to find something that is not going to be about costing me much money. It's not going to be about learning a new skill because this is too much of a long term. That doesn't have any friction. That is easy to be done. So matching your current lifestyle means taking the behavior, and this is me. Do I have the motivation to do it? Do I feel right? Do I want really to do it? Am I capable because of my current situation to do it? And this is where you are going to be separating the ones that are feasible and help you out the most with your goal, because the others don't take care of it just now. Elena, I think that there is a couple of comments in the chat.
And yeah, not to worry, we're on it. Yeah.
Okay.
They're just, yeah. And the next step here is really starting small. We really mean tiny, tiny, tiny small. And this is not based on sort of our necessary. We did experience it, but this is not based out of thin air. This is based on research and a lot of the studies we do around how do you actually make a change that is necessary without having to rely on motivation. How do you make sure that whatever you're looking to change, right, is consistent and you're disciplined enough to do it? Because that's two things that we need: consistency and discipline. In order to make that happen, you need to make it super tiny. And an example is, if you're looking to exercise, for example, you never went to the gym before, right? You've never went to the gym before, or a better one, let's say you're shy or you're more of a conservative person, right? And Yvonne, you can relate to, maybe you can share your own stories as well. But if you're more of a sort of person who's conservative in their approach, you might not want to go and just, start going to large groups of people and start meeting people. But maybe you say, maybe let me meet somebody online. Maybe it's a little bit more approachable. So taking tiny little actions, or maybe it's just saying hi to somebody in the elevator next time you're, I don't know, in your building. Maybe it's just something as saying, hi, how are you doing, to a person making your coffee in the morning. Those small little tiny action that will help you go towards the next step. And that's what you need to think about, is how can you once you've figured out that behavior, how can you break it down into tiny, tiny, tiny steps that are not scary, that your brain doesn't freak out and say, this is too much change, I don't want to do it, right? So if you've never been to the gym and all of a sudden you sign up for, I don't know, a HIIT class or a CrossFit session, you do this 2-3 times, you're going to be like, I'm done. Your body's like, I'm not going back, I'm in pain, or I'm over it. So how can you instead say, I've never been to the gym, but let me just start walking for 10 minutes every day. Let me do 2 push-ups every morning after I finish brushing my teeth. Let me just find a way to move my body for 5 to 10 minutes a day. So when we mean tiny, we really mean tiny.
Elena, most of the times that people hears about this tiny story, they think that it's counterintuitive. Because why? Because we humans have expectations of change, and we think that change has to happen drastically in one shot. And we always point out stories of people who have said to do big things in one shot because they just have motivation. We are talking about the 1%. Most of the people who achieve their goals, they do it because of consistency rather than radical actions, because it just doesn't work with the biology of our brain to do these big changes in one shot. We can discuss a little bit further, maybe after to discuss more about the kind of habit people in our practice are doing in order to develop themselves. Step is about finding your triggers. Change doesn't happen because you have decided to do a small action that is going to take you only 2 minutes per day. Let's say that you have decided to say, I just want to become knowledgeable in data science, but obviously, as an entrepreneur, you have very little time. But what if you start by saying, I will do like 10 pages, read something about data science, 10 pages per day just before going to bed. So very small efforts. But in order to do the effort, you need to have a reminder, a trigger that will help you out to remember to do the action. Now, the most used triggers are the ones that we are doing in a day-to-day basis. Like, we have a bunch of different things that we are recurrently doing in a day-to-day basis. Let's say brushing our teeth. Most of us drink coffee or tea early in the morning. Most of us have a certain number of routines just before going to bed, either bending our clothing, putting it in the side. So how can we leverage on actions that we do every single day to plug in the new behavior? So what happens is that the new behavior, instead of just a sentence, I'm going to read 10 pages of data science every day, it will become, when I am going to sleep and bending my clothing beside of my bed, I will read 10 pages about data science. So, for instance, another one. While I'm drinking my coffee early in the morning, I will write the 3 most important things I want to achieve during the day. Or if you want to be more empathetic with people, the first thing that I do when I'm sitting in front of my laptop, I will connect with a person in LinkedIn that I haven't met before, just one. Imagine if you are using the power of linking with existing routines that you have every day with the small tiny actions. What are the chances that you drop because there is too much effort? Nobody has 1 hour to go to the gym or 2 hours to go to the gym, but people have enough time to devote small actions within the 2 minutes range. Right, Elena? That worked for us. It should work for some other people.
Listen, if it worked for me, it can work for so many. Promise. It took me a lot to get disciplined in this way. And the final piece here, and the funny, and I'm pausing because I'm laughing, because the final piece here is something that Ivan does, and it's very strange. He celebrates in the most weird ways. And now that you're unfrozen, you were frozen there for a minute, Ivan. So now that you're unfrozen, you can tell people the little thing that you do, like the little excitement. How do you celebrate your wins?
So when I celebrate my wins, what I do is that I have this tendency to do this. Mm-hmm. So that means that I'm excited. Now, it looks a little bit weird what I'm doing, Elena, but what I'm giving a signal to my brain that a little step that I have achieved is like a little reward, like having the production of the enzyme that says I am having pleasure. When this enzyme is produced, it becomes addictive for the brain. It's a little bit like eating a little bit of chocolate. Well, it is giving the signal to the brain, do it again. So I'm going to be repeating this behavior that I want to do again and again if I am capable of recognizing that I have done a very small step and I give a signal to my brain, pleasure, celebration. Wow. you may find your own way, Elena.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what we encourage everybody to do. So find small ways for you to celebrate. I mean, we've had clients who go as far as just, I don't know, go to enjoy just a nice cup of coffee, to treat themselves to a spa, to buying themselves something new, to as simple as just like a pat on the back, or taking a moment to just like take a screenshot of their particular achievement for that day, etc. So whatever works for you, the idea is to celebrate, so that it's a reward system, right? So that you want to keep doing and continue. And the final part here I want to add is just to, to keep in mind that even if there's a, you've set a new habit and you have your little habit tracker, which we're going to give you, by the way, in a minute, but you have your little habit tracker to track daily. And let's say a day you kind of, fell off the train, let's just say, and you didn't do it for a day or 2 days. That's all right. The idea is to just acknowledge whatever obstacles have that caused you to get off the track, and then just get back on it. So there's no shame if you skip a day or two. Life happens, things happen, but the idea is to recognize what was it that stopped you from achieving your little check mark for that day, and prevent it from happening again if possible, and then just get right back in it, and just keep going. So I think that's the biggest obstacle sometimes that we face, is you just kind of, you've been doing so well, and then you're like, and then you just feel bad about yourself, and it's like snowball effect. Stop yourself and restart and get back into it.
This is where you have to use a little bit your loop of having an assumption, measuring, and do the learnings, in fact. So you, why it didn't work that day, so that you can remove that thing that prevented you to do your new behavior or action.
I'm mindful we only have a couple of minutes left, Yvonne, so maybe we can just, let's just wrap up. I guess we, instead of, I don't know if we have time to do the Slido, but maybe just if you guys can drop us in a message, drop us in the chat, kind of what are your biggest takeaways from today's session? That'll be great. And while you do that, first, we started the session saying you're going to walk away with some knowledge about the brain, about growth mindset, about what does neuroscience have to do with it, right? How can you create these habits? And that's exactly what we've given you. So we hope that you found this helpful, but it does not stop here. And what we want you to do is we want you to scan this little QR code that is on the slide, and we want you to give you access to one of our platforms for a 10-day challenge, which it's, in this case, it's more of continuation of what we've been doing, where you can actually apply and practice, to continue to practice everything we have just shared with you. So again, it doesn't work, if it's just knowledge. We don't believe in that. I said, first you need to learn, and then you need to implement. Otherwise, you're going to lose it. So here's a chance for you to implement. Yvonne, if you need to say anything here more while we wait for our comments to come in, or for any questions.
So you can shoot for questions, scan the QR code. And I just wanted to give you, so when you enter into that platform, you have a bunch of new learnings, actions, reflections. It lasts 10 days. And every day, in fact, is about devoting 5 minutes to learn something new about how do you create new behaviors. You have also daily access to the course, 5 minutes. You can post anything. You can connect with us, in fact, and ask us questions directly into the chat, because we have the app. So we receive little messages that somebody is asking us to a new question. And there is also a global chat with the rest of the audience. Now, if you want to learn more about mindset and the habit formation concept, we have selected a couple of things that you may want to learn more of. So we have Carol Dweck, that was mentioned at least 20 times by Elena today. I know that she's your hero. We have the brain that changes itself. How do you create habits with atomic habits, and the tiny habits concept from Professor Beji Fogg. And I cannot see the rest. And of course, if you are not familiar with the lean startup concept, you must do Eric Ries. It is quite easy to read. So otherwise, guys, I think that this is the time where you can tell us a little bit more of questions. And if you want us to send the link for the app, I will be looking for it right now.
And thank you guys for your attention. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for your interactions. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn, stay in touch. Thank you to Astrolabs for another yet beautiful session, well organized. So thank you guys from us to you.
Thank you, Elena and Ivan, for joining us. And guys, before you drop off, we request you to please fill up the survey form so that we can, share the deck with you and other details from that search. Thank you once again. And just a parting note, the recording would be available on all our social media channels, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. So if you want to go back and have a look at it, just log into any of these channels and you can find it over there. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Ivan and Elena, once again. Have a good day. Bye.